This time, Doncaster Belles, the unfashionable giants of women's football.
No, nay, never. No, nay, never, no more. 'Cause I'll stay a wild rover forever and more.
Hello and welcome to By Far the Greatest Team, a podcast in which football fans attempt the impossible to decide once and for all who is the greatest team of all time. My name's Graham Dunn, putting the case for Oxford United, and our stats man over in the corner, it is Jamie Rooney.
I just want to pick up on your unfashionable giants for the Doncaster Belles. I think there's a case for us in this particular episode to maybe weight the idea that they are possibly a fashionable giant in the making. As we pick through this story, I think there could be an opportunity because of the incredible rich history and importance of this particular football club in the world of women's football. I think for the next however many minutes, Graham, there's a chance for you and I to state the case that if there's any big American investors out there, this could be a place to be.
Definitely so. And I should stress, unfashionable, I'm not talking about their fashion sense, although much of my research was based on watching a documentary from 1994-95, and the Doncaster Belles were carrying out the same crimes against fashion that I was around that time. But really, about how Doncaster Belles as a club fell out of fashion about 10 years or so down the line, which we will come to. But before we talk about this story, I'm just gonna flag what happened in my weekend. So I was lucky enough to be in the States for work, and due to a series of miscommunications and disasters and bad planning on my part, I ended up with pretty much no option but to fly back from Las Vegas and attempt to get to the Stadium of Light for a 3:00 kickoff. Bearing in mind that landed at Gatwick at 9 a.m. So the flight is 10 and a half hours, probably a couple of hours, travelling to the airport, got from Gatwick up to home, and then picked up a coat, and then the next 5 hours in, I was clearly going to be struggling. But I did. So, I made it. It's sort of in time for the second half. And I think that was something like 18 hours on the road non-stop. And of course, what tends to happen when, and undoubtedly happens, it's the golden rule of being a football fan, that fundamentally the more effort you go to get to a game, the less your team rewards you. And Oxford definitely rose to the occasion. No shots on target in the entire game, and I would say a comfortable 2-0 win, which fellow Sunderland fan Phil was able to enjoy with me after the game. And I don't know, Jamie, is this something that rings true? The more effort you make to get to a game, whether that's by distance or trying to fit it in between when you should be going to a wedding or when you've just leaving something early, you're trying to combine. Just the more effort I make, the less it's worth it.
Well, I think it's bad manners on behalf of the Oxford United playing staff and management team that they didn't make an extra effort, because you've travelled over 9,000 kilometres to make this game in very tight time conditions, across a massive ocean from one continent to another, taking a couple of flights. So I just think it's bad behaviour from Oxford United. I think an effort should have been made. Having said that, I don't think it makes a jot of difference. But what it does open the door to is longest journeys. I think, your journey is almost 10,000 kilometres. I think I just kind of worked it out. It'd be interesting to know what is the longest football journey people can make to go and watch their team and watch their team lose.
The die's cast. I can really date why I think the less effort, and why I always feel once the prospect of going to a game has first been raised, that I feel I need to go ahead and do it, otherwise I'll be punished. And very early on, in my life. I just wasn't sure whether I could be asked to go and watch Oxford play Ipswich. But this was back in our Division 1 days, when Division 1 was Division 1. And Ipswich took a 3-0 lead, and Oxford stormed back 1 second, scored 4 goals in the second half. John Aldridge scores a hat-trick. It's, one of the greatest comebacks of all time. And of course, I wasn't at that game. And if you can't get to the game, you just want a 1-0 win, don't you? That's all you want. You want the points, but you don't want to have missed a classic. But enough of my challenges. We are talking about Doncaster Belles. And this is a really interesting story, and a story that, on the one hand, I'm super familiar with, because Doncaster Belles' name is one which, to my mind, is synonymous with dominating women's football. But actually, it's a story I didn't really know anywhere near much about as I was doing my research around it. But what I find particularly interesting, obviously, on this pod, in the first season, we did the excellent Dick Kerr ladies, the true pioneers of football in England. And I think you could definitely make a case that Doncaster Belles are kind of the next step in that journey, and are a continuation of that in many ways, I think. In as much as they're dominating the game, they have a success rate which is quite incredible, but they're doing it with really limited resources at that time. And it appears, I think one of the big links and one of the big themes when we were talking with Gail Newsham talking about Dick Kerr Lady, she spent a lot of the time talking about the camaraderie of the players and how much fun they had doing it. And, again, my view of it might be coloured by having watched the documentary, which we'll talk about in a while. But, it did appear more than anything that especially in those early years, Doncaster Belles have, a fantastic spirit, and it is about girls playing football, enjoying themselves.
Yeah, the spirit is incredible. The documentary is absolutely brilliant. I think it got criticised when it came out back in 1995, I think it was, for various reasons. But I think that was more of a sign of the times. When you watch it back now, it is a great fly-on-the-wall documentary of a bunch of people, a bunch of girls just having a great time together and loving football and loving being a successful football team. And it's interesting, you make the kind of the leap between the brilliant Dick Kerr ladies, where we had the wonderful Gail on, as you mentioned, talking through the importance of that particular football team. It's a giant step in time from Dick Kerr ladies in the 1920s to where the Doncaster Belles get formed in the late 1960s. And then from then on, you think this could be, and obviously we know through the history of football that the women's football team in the United Kingdom was, or in England in particular, was banned in 1921. The Dick Kerr ladies were partly responsible for that, for being so damn successful, drawing 56,000 at Goodison Park on Boxing Day, when the men's football team in Liverpool were getting less than 50,000, both Liverpool and Everton, on the same weekend. So the FA, in their infinite wisdom at that particular moment, put a ban on English women's football and made it very difficult for them to organise themselves and play organised football matches. But it did happen, and football did continue to be played right through up until 1971, when the ban was lifted. And it links us to another women's team, that we've covered on this particular podcast, and that's Denmark from 1970 and 71, when they won the unofficial Martini and Rosso World Cup. And incredibly, in 1971, you've got these women's football teams playing out in the Azteca Stadia in front of 90,000 people. There's a demand for women's football. It's always been there. It was in the early 1870s when Nettie Honeyball, that's a pseudonym. She was one of the originators to create a football team, and that's where women's football goes all the way back to. But then in 1971, after this incredible effort in the Women's World Cup, the FA lifted the ban, but they didn't really support, as we've learned. And Doncaster Belles were just starting their football history and heritage at this particular moment. Formed in 1969, and a brilliant way they were formed, Graham. Do you know how they were formed?
from what I think I've understood this, right, they were when they formed by some of the girls that were selling kind of raffle tickets or tickets at the ground of Doncaster Rovers.
Yeah, pretty much. Sheila Stocks, who is an absolute Doncaster Belles legend. She spent, I think her playing career was almost 20 years, if not more. And she stayed at the club for her entire history. I think she might even still be attached to the club now. Yeah, she's selling lottery tickets outside Doncaster Rovers to raise funds so they could organise and play football. So the girls could play football, which is absolutely brilliant because there was a demand. People in the South Yorkshire area wanted to play football. It's that, we're close to Sheffield again. There was a league. There was a ladies' league in Sheffield, the home of football, as well as snooker. And so the Doncaster Belles, who were called in their early years Bellevue Belles, which I think is an absolute brilliant football name because the links to the football ground where Doncaster Rovers played at the time, they were able to organise themselves through raising funds in their own imaginative way so they could play organised football at a time when English football was still had a ban on women playing the game.
I will raise Bellevue Belles with Red Star Southampton, which I just love, which is one of the teams.
I'll take your Red Star Southampton and I'll raise you off Friends of Fulham.
Friends of Fulham is good. Friends of Fulham sounds like a support group more than a football team, to be honest, when I saw that name. So from those origins, so Doncaster Belles, and they'd been playing in a sort of a kind of a regional league around that time. Is there any? And obviously, this story starts to begin when we start talking about the formation of the first kind of national league. But what's happening up until that point?
Yeah, so they in the early 1970s they play in the Sheffield League, but that closes down after just a few years, and so they move to the Nottingham League, where they then go on and dominate for a very big period. And in that time, I think they win about 11 championships in the Nottingham League. So they are the cream of the crop. They are already a winning football team. And they also get to compete in the Women's FA Cup, where they win their first of many FA Cup titles in 1983.
And the Belles have something of a stranglehold on the FA Cup. That becomes a sort of very significant tournament for Doncaster Belles, doesn't it?
I think they play in 11 finals out of 12 years. So they don't always win it, though. Their hit rate is 50-50, but they are making the final. And here's the gap for us, Graham, and you probably found this yourself. It's really hard to get records on the internet about the early rounds of the Women's FA Cup in this particular period. So through the 1980s, the 1990s, and even the early 2000s, if you want to see how Doncaster Belles progressed through to the finals, which they made multiple times, it's difficult because there's a gap. Incredibly, there's a gap on the internet that hasn't really plugged the history of the women's game.
I was shocked at the gaps that even for sort of kind of very established. So Karen Walker, who's like has an unbelievable goal record, and I was trying to track down some various substantiate some of the suggestions about her goal scoring record, and on Wikipedia there's no, under the appearances bit, it just says she plays for Doncaster Rovers for 20 years. No indication of the number of goals, which is absolutely staggering. It has kind of stuff for internationals, 41 goals in 86 games, which gives you some indication of what a prolific scorer she is. But you're absolutely right. There is, trying to fill the gaps in here becomes quite challenging and difficult. And that's, I think, just to go back to Dick Kerr ladies for a moment, that's why the work of someone like Gail was so significant in actually documenting and tracking down. That's a historical task, but even our lifetime, women's football hasn't been very well documented, and it is quite challenging to actually find the facts behind this.
Yeah, I think this is an attitude and a theme that has been there since the very beginning. Like we talked about, women's football goes all the way back in England. to the late 1860s when men's football was just in its infancy at that particular moment. It's always been there. You need people like Gail Newsham, the brilliant Gail Newsham, who's prepared to go and do the legwork. And I love that her goal is to document every single match that the Dick Kerr ladies have played.
Yeah.
And it would be fascinating to see the history of the Doncaster Belles and see the games they play. Their biggest win, 46-0. Can't find it anywhere though. All we know is it's a headline stat. I'd love to see the goal scorers in that particular game and the minutes of when the goals are scored. You know, we've had big goal scoring games before with teams that we've covered on this thing. 46 is a goal every 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, so a minute's injury time in each half. That's exactly right. Every 2 minutes. Was there a late rally, or did they, within the Premier League, there's lots of talk, will a team ever get past 9 goals? I'm sure they will at some point. The team will get the 10th. But, the hunt is on. But, how close were they to 50 in that game, I wonder?
Yeah, we're relying on people way more informed than we are in the boundaries of the Doncaster Belles football team and maybe the Doncaster area to kind of shed some light on that one, which we would absolutely encourage.
So this team's hugely successful locally, successful within the FA Cup tournament. They have a great record there. And then we get to a step up. So this is it 1992 or 1991 when the FA clear the path for the first Women's National League?
Yeah, 1991, they create the inaugural National League. 8 teams are in it. And it's a stepping stone, but they're tiny steps. They're all tiny steps. So from the Belles, when they were formed in 1969 and playing through when professionalism was, when the ban was lifted in 71, they're tiny steps to 1991, 20 years later. So, I mean, even FIFA was slow to adopt the women's game on the world stage. I mean, the first Women's World Cup, even though the ban was lifted in 71 across many countries, I think as well. FIFA didn't organise the first Women's World Cup until 1991, and even then they didn't want to attach their name. I think they called it the M&M World Championship, which sounds brilliant. I mean, I'm on board, especially if you got a bowl of peanut M&Ms. I fancy my chances taking anyone on with those sugar lights. But yeah, it's 1991, 92. It's the new Women's National League. And Doncaster Belles are very much in it, having played in the Nottinghamshire League and dominated for so long. And they're managed by Brian Broadhurst at that particular moment. And Doncaster Rovers go into that as one of the favourites.
They go into it as one of the favourites, and the tag of favourites isn't wasted on them because they have something of an impressive season, don't they? It's up there with Total Network Solutions, isn't it, I think?
I think it's better than Total Network Solutions because it's the most... I mean, you're picking holes in this, what is a perfect record. So there's 8 teams in the league and Doncaster Belles win all 14 games, home and away. And I'm sure you've got the goal statistics there in front of you, Graham. And if you haven't, just to help you with that, they score 89 goals. They concede just the 4 goals.
That is a brilliant return. That is an unbelievable return.
It is. And maybe you could argue, maybe the cynics amongst us will argue the quality of football not as good as it could be in that particular league, potentially. There may be people that would question the quality of the teams around them. But the brilliantly named, as you already mentioned, Red Star Southampton, they come second. They're 7 points behind. And then the points are spread around. So I think the quality is fairly level between positions 2 and 8. I think we've just got ourselves a scenario where we've got a team that are just way better than everyone else.
It's not just the league. They've been highly successful in the FA Cup, and they are again in completing the double, don't they? Yeah,
they go on and they put more misery into the brilliant Red Star Southampton, and they win the final 4-0. And do you know what? There's something significant, and this is where we really need to see a depth of information because we don't have this incredible detail on a statistic, and it's Karen Walker, nicknamed Whacker because she whacks the goals in, scored a hat-trick in the final, but that's her final hat-trick where she scored a hat-trick in every single round of the FA Cup. Incredible.
That is quite something to get a hat-trick in every round. As you say, I hunted to see if I could track this fact down and get it substantiated. I'm sure there's no reason to think it isn't true. She did score a huge number of goals across her career. She was some player. What's not clear to me either is how many rounds there might be. How many games does this? I assume it's more than just the 8 teams in the National League. So I assume it, like the FA Cup, in the men's game, that gets expanded out. But exactly how many rounds and how much of an achievement that is, but you can't fully detail. But a hat-trick in every round, I mean, it's really, I just can't think of anyone who's achieved that level of domination.
Yeah, it's a real shame. Not even on the FA website do they have records of the previous rounds in the 1991-92 Women's FA Cup, which I think is an own goal from the FA. I think they should be making some concerted effort to actually inform the rest of us, the teams that were participating at this particular moment. But even on the brilliant RSSF, which is one of my favourite web resources, brilliant website, very basic but lovely, they don't even have it. And they normally have everything. I mean, they have League Division 3 Madagascar results from 1974, 1975. It's ridiculous, but not even they have it. They do. There is data for the League Cup that was taking part at that particular moment, which is interesting because there was only one division. But in the League Cup, Arsenal are competing. So there's clearly a second tier of teams coming through. And we do know in the 92-93 season, Arsenal themselves get promoted into the Women's National League, which is become the Premier League for women, around about the same time that the Men's Premier League was taking shape as well, back in 1992, with all its glory of Sky. And that really starts changing the relationship between Doncaster Belles winning on a regular basis.
And just it is worth noting in the, if anyone's to question whether Karen Walker might score a hat-trick in every game in the league in 1991-92, across the 14 matches, Karen Walker scores 36 goals, which my maths makes, that's just under. I mean, if you're going to be technically harsh, that is fractionally under a hat-trick in every game. It's pretty close to it, though, isn't it? I think that suggests that it's not outlandish to suggest she scores a hat-trick in every game she plays.
Yeah, it's also, I'm doing this off the top of my head, it's around 40% of the goals for the Doncaster Belles in that season. If they've scored 89 goals, I think, 36 is going to be, give or take a percentage or two, is going to be around 40% of the goals, the team goals. And we all know that when you have a great striker that's able to score goals on a regular basis, you are a threat. We're seeing that with Manchester City right now with Erling Haaland, who is an absolute goal-scoring beast. Karen Walker was the goal-scoring beastette at that particular moment for the Doncaster Belles.
But she was far from the only player. I mean, the Belles have quite a number of English internationals at that stage, including the captain, Gillian Coulthard.
Yeah, Gillian Coulthard played for the Belles she had 2 spells, but like almost 20 seasons, I think, or 15, 16 seasons, sorry. And she was the first female player in the women's game to reach 100 caps for England. So she regularly played and captained England and went on to achieve 119 caps for England and score 30 goals. I think she's still in the top 10. And bearing in mind that the English national team plays far more games now and has done in the last 5 or 6 seasons than it ever used to. The games are more organised. There's more tournaments. It's got a higher profile. So for Gillian Coulthard to be in the top 10 of appearances, also the top 10 for goals, is still a great achievement considering she hasn't played for England for almost 25 years.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Arsenal ladies getting promoted in that first season, so they joined the league in the second season of the formation of that league, and it sets up a brilliant rivalry, actually, doesn't it? I mean, Arsenal, in many ways, it's the complete opposite to Doncaster Belles. You have the north-south gap. You have the being attached to a fashionable, largely successful London Premier League giant in Arsenal, and it sets up a rivalry across these coming years in particular, which actually is far from straightforward for Doncaster Belles. I mean, I think in many ways you could argue Arsenal are a bit of a kryptonite to Doncaster Belles, can't you? They just seem to have a stranglehold over them.
Yeah, not entirely, but yeah, they're definitely the yin to the yang. And there's a fundamental difference between the two. Doncaster Belles are an autonomous entity. They are their own football team. They're not linked at this particular moment with Doncaster Rovers, the men's team in that particular part of the world. Arsenal women is linked to the Arsenal football team. Now, how much support and financial weight they would get in that particular moment, it's hard to say. But we do know that Arsenal will go on and dominate women's football for a good 12 or 15 year period. They will win multiple championships, and the team, one of the teams for us to cover at some point, the 2006 team, win absolutely everything: the European Cup, the League Cup, the FA Cup, the Tea Cup, the Sync Cup, every cup go in. The Arsenal team goes on and scheme. So this is an Arsenal team that's got the back in some shape or form from the club itself. The men's team has the recognition. So there's a big difference, and I think it comes as a bit of a shock for the Doncaster Belles because they're still dominating. The league has expanded by 2 teams. Now there's 10 teams in the league now, so you're playing 18 games. Doncaster Belles win 16 of those games and they lose 2. And they lose those games. One of those games they lose to Arsenal, which was their first defeat, their first league defeat, the Doncaster Belles' first league defeat in 15 years. I mean,
I saw this stat, and again, this is where I was crying out for more information. I thought, can this be right? How can this be? No, you don't have a league defeat for 15 years. That is just complete dominance at the highest level, consistency at the highest level as well. But you're absolutely right. They lose to Arsenal and they throw away some points to Wimbledon, and actually that is enough. And, if you win 16 out of 18 games, you pretty much would still expect to win the title. You would think that would be good enough to win the title. But it does show the level that these 2 teams are setting, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's good for Doncaster Belles that Arsenal come into the league and start really turning the screw in terms of the competitive nature of the league. And you're right, the loss to Wimbledon was a surprise. They would never expect to lose to Wimbledon. I mean, in the following season, I think they go on and beat Wimbledon 10-0 in one particular game. So you can see the Wimbledon result as a shock. And I think it's that loss that if they would have won that game, they would have pipped Arsenal in that particular season, the 92-93 season, on goal difference. So they would have both won had Doncaster Belles been able to beat Wimbledon in that particular season. They would have both won 17 games. They would have both lost 1 game each against each other. And Doncaster Belles, I think, would have had a goal difference of maybe +1, maybe +2, depending on the nature of how they could beat Wimbledon to win the league. But Arsenal are a niggle because not only do Arsenal pit Doncaster Belles in the league, they also beat them in the FA Cup final as well.
Yes, as I say, Arsenal have something of a hold over Doncaster, definitely in that initial season. Now, we get back into the following season, and this is a real crunch season. Now, by this stage, the club are managed by Paul Edmonds. Now, he's a few spells, I think, in charge of the club. Former Leicester City and Bournemouth player, but also here's where the connection with Sheila Stocks comes in again.
Yeah, they're married. So Sheila Stocks in some of the team sheets is called Sheila Edmonds because she's married to Paul. And I think it just kind of highlights the close-knit nature of this football team. It's something that's so relatable. It's a local club with local players. And I mean, most of the players come within the South Yorkshire, Doncaster area. And they're an absolute family group. They really enjoy each other's company because something else that happens during this 94-95 season, we've already alluded to a little bit, is the BBC, for whatever reason, have taken an interest in Doncaster Belles and they've made a 50-minute documentary, and it is fantastic. And in that documentary, you see, as you already referenced, Graham, the incredible team spirit and camaraderie between these girls. It is wonderful. Dancing on the table, drinking, going to the pub and going to a nightclub, 2 days before an FA Cup final and getting levered. I mean, these are girls I can relate to.
I think what is really clear, and that was really why I kind of underlined the link with Dick Kerr ladies. This idea of a group who've got a huge togetherness and really sort of enjoying the opportunity to play. And women's football at the time, it didn't have the same opportunities. They didn't have. Many of these players are playing in the wrong era. They make a tremendous commitment to the growth of women's football, but actually they don't really reap the rewards of it. And you are struck by the lack of showbiz, I guess, around it. They're just it almost looks like a Sunday League team. That spirit that they have in there, some of the pitches they're playing on, some of the pubs, it's not as basic as they are talking about travelling up, staying at a hotel ahead of big games. There's elements to which, I don't want to dismiss the level of professionalism of the club, but it's obviously a part-time. They're all part-time. They've all got jobs. Again, that really underlines. People talk about fixture congestion, but they have to get time off work if they're going to play 2-3 games in the game, and so fixture congestion and fixture pile up, which continues to happen, obviously it has even more of an impact in the part-time players.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, it's really important to point out that these players are not getting paid. They do not get paid to play for Doncaster Belles, and they can play. They are good quality footballers, and you can see that with some of the footage in the documentary. Plus the fact, that these girls would have been competing against guys in the Sheffield area, and then guys that could have gone on and had careers with lower league teams, and they were as good, if not better, than some of those players, and that kind of gets marked in the documentary. But what I love about this particular documentary, Graham, and what I think it highlights, and you've kind of already touched on it, is that there tends to be occasionally you hear some unfair cynicism that the men's game, they don't really care. The players don't care. They're just in it for the money. They're getting these big price tags. They're just there for the money, and they don't really care about the game. And you and I know we've played right at the lowest level, which was the highest level we ever played at as well. And we know that football, you don't play football to get any financial. I mean, if you can get financial benefits out of it, that's fantastic. If you can turn it into a job and get paid to do it, that's fantastic. But you don't do it primarily for that reason. And we see that in the documentary. These girls are having a great time. They're having to pay sub to play and have the privilege of playing for Doncaster Belles. The team's as the best in the country at that particular moment. And they absolutely love it. They're having the time of their life. And they think football. Even when they're in their day jobs, they're thinking football. And we see a wonderful little vignette with Mandy Lowe, who's working in a pottery factory, a defender, a really, really charismatic personality. And she's just saying, I just think about football all the time. I just think about football all the time, which is so relatable. And it's just a shame that the women's game just hasn't had, and Doncaster Belles in this particular period, haven't had the full support from the right associations to turn the game into a professionalism. And we only see that, we've only really seen that properly in the last 10 years.
Absolutely. So we should flag that. So the documentary, BBC documentary, and it's called The Belles. You can find it on YouTube. Do recommend it. You get a real flavour for this team. It specifically follows the culmination to the 93-94 season. And it essentially starts with the FA Cup final, which, do you remember where that was played? Was that played at Scunthorpe? Was that Glanford Park? Was that Scunthorpe or?
I know it was played in Scunthorpe. I don't know which ground it was played at, actually. I'll have to check the notes. Mm-hmm. And it was played at Glanford Park, Graham. You're an absolute legend when it comes to football grounds. That's why you've got that wonderful Football Hoppers map behind you.
Scunthorpe is ticked off. I think it's the ground they moved into after Glanford Park, I think. Now I am testing myself. They definitely had a new ground at some point. So, it's not the most glamorous of venues, but it's a proper league stadium, which is definitely good. I should flag. I think I was watching one of the international games around that time. There's a video from one of those international games, and the previous international being held at the Manor Ground, I think, Oxford's brilliant ground. So I shouldn't be dissing any of the football stadiums that these games are playing
the
at this
final,
time.
yeah.
Without playing fantastically well, I think, in fairness, Doncaster Belles win that FA Cup. Unusually, Karen Walker gets the winner.
It's quite insightful though, because they beat Knowsley United, who later go on to become Liverpool and currently playing in the Women's Super League in the top tier. They win the game 1-0. They're 1-0 up at half time, and the manager Paul Edmonds absolutely rips them. He hasn't got a positive word to say. He's very disappointed in terms of their application, their speed of play, their speed of pass, the way they're getting out strengthened by the opponent. And he really lays into them. So you got this team that's used to winning. They're 1-0 up in the cup final, on course to do their second double after winning the double in 91-92. Although the 93-94 season double, they are competing with Arsenal. So there's probably a greater significance in terms of securing this one. And he gives them hell. He gives them hell. And they do hold on. And they win the game 1-0. And I think there was a Knowsley goal that was scored that was chalked off as well, way before the days of VAR.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, one of the things that the documentary really highlights is, after, they go and celebrate it properly, but then they had to go and play, a league game within, I think, 48 hours or something.
The celebration is brilliant. Yeah, they go to what looks like a local curry house or a bar, and they're on the tables and they're dancing, and they've got the cups and they're drinking loads. Yeah, and they have a crucial league game just 3 days later because they're going toe to toe with Arsenal for the league, and they've still incredibly. You're right. The FA Cup final for the Women's FA Cup final was played in late April, and the season, the football season, the league season, will go on to the first week of June. So Doncaster Belles still have 8 league games to play to secure the league championship, and they're neck and neck with this brilliant Arsenal team as well.
Yeah, I was staggered. There were quite so many games. I mean, it's actually half a season, essentially.
Yeah.
And to their credit, they do go and win the bulk of these games. They are set up with a trip to Arsenal, which I think they can almost seal the title, but it does set up. I think the game's at Hendon, and I think Doncaster Belles actually take the lead in that game. But once again, the Arsenal kryptonite hits back, and it sort of works in the documentary. But they lose that game, and everything's set up for the finale, which I think is against Knowsley again.
Yeah, so they lose out to Arsenal 3-1. And what's interesting about that, and again, we can't substantiate it because we can't find the records. I think the Arsenal goalkeeper or goalkeepers weren't available for that game, because I think there's a central defender who's gone in goal for Arsenal. But for the life of me, I wasn't able to find out whether that was the case and why that was the case more interestingly. So
I was trying to. Edmonds definitely makes a comment along these lines at half time, which suggests that he points out they got a centre back in goal and you've not had a shot. And there is some footage of the keeper in the first half quite reluctant to use her hands. So it is entirely plausible that was the case, which, again, does put in mind that it is this isn't a massive squad game. You're having to play, whenever you can play, and this has been a problem in the women's game for a long time. Is actually finding consistent times to play, to have that kind of routine that you would need, wouldn't you? That, and if you're just cramming games in when you can, especially when they're maybe struggling for grounds, struggling for the weather, you just aren't going to have a shortage of players.
Yeah, and the fixture pile up is a factor. It is piling up, and it does become an issue for the manager, Paul Edmonds. But right, as you said, they lose to Arsenal in this critical game, and then they go on 3 days later where they're playing Knowsley United again. And if they win that game, they will have won the league championship and the FA Cup double. And they're actually going for a treble as well, because there's the League Cup they exist at this particular moment, and once again they're in the final with Arsenal.
Am I right? Does that game not happen? It seems like that game either gets massively delayed or doesn't actually happen.
I mean, this is the frustrating thing about this team. There's so much more. I feel like we're just doing a part one. We're kind of setting up maybe next season we can do more details. Maybe get someone from the Doncaster Belles to come on to give us more details, which will be fascinating. I don't know. In answer to your question, I know that Arsenal are given the trophy. They have it as a statistic that they won the League Cup in 93-94 by defeating Doncaster Belles in the final, but in terms of the circumstances, I don't know.
Yeah, it's difficult. The bit I read about it was that because the season overran and because the Premier League Cup final against Arsenal was held over until the following season. So, either way, it sort of takes the gloss of it. You would want to be playing it whilst you're at the very least in the same season, definitely. So, that's probably the peak season for Doncaster Belles, but they are still, they remain a prominent side, even if that's the last of their titles. Is that right?
Yeah, they beat Knowsley United 7-0 to secure their second League and Cup double. An incredible record again, played 18, won 16, drawn 1, lost 1, scored 110 goals and conceded 16 goals in this particular season.
Leaky defence.
And they are champions
this time.
Yeah, and it's around about this time that I think the wind of change is coming in for women's football, and it's whether Doncaster Rovers are going to be at the forefront of that change. And they do compete quite well up until the early 2000s. They are competing in the top 3 positions, but they don't win another championship.
There's definitely over those coming seasons there's a bit of a sign of the times or what might be about to come down the line. I think it's in the 1999-2000 season where Croydon do the League Cup double. Doncaster Belles finish second to them, and for the inaugural Charity Shield, Charlton and Arsenal are picked. Which sort of that's it. So Croydon get taken over by Charlton. Croydon become Charlton, but instead of Doncaster Belles, Arsenal are picked for commercial reasons. And I think maybe then you start to see a little hint as to what is going to come of Doncaster Belles, who a few years later are at the end of a pretty staggering decision as a football purist. You'd say, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of many times where Doncaster Belles are treated pretty poorly by the football associations. I mean, Doncaster Belles are a community-based football team. Even if you look at their current season, they're not turning over big numbers, less than 250,000, I think, is their turnover. And so this is a football team that has never really had any financial backing. As we've mentioned, we've got a bunch of girls that just love playing football and they just get an absolute kick out of it. And that's why we're talking about this particular team. But I don't think Doncaster Belles have ever had any real great funding as the game's been developing. And we've seen the Premier League teams, the men's Premier League teams, start backing their female football teams, their women's football teams. The Women's Super League, which was formed in 2011, and another opportunity where Doncaster Belles were seen as second-class citizens. Doncaster Belles should have been part of that particular league. They did finish bottom the previous season, but agreement had been made that you would retain your rights in the very first Women's Super League. Doncaster Belles were kicked out, the only team that was kicked out in place for Manchester City. So again, it's the big teams pushing their weight around and getting their own way because they're the guys that have more money than the smaller clubs.
I have a lot of sympathy for this team, and actually having got demoted in pretty cruel circumstances, the Doncaster Belles have never really been able to recapture those glory years and have sort of gradually slid down the leagues a little bit.
Yeah, it's a rocky road. They tried a merger with Doncaster Rovers. I think it was probably fashionable at the time because you could see that there was a real development, bigger steps and strides were being taken in the development of the women's game at that particular moment in England. But that didn't last long, and they kind of went their separate ways a few years later. But then you've also got the development of the Women's Super League, and there's a lot of money being ploughed in that. Doncaster did come back up. They did get back into the Women's Super League, and they had one season there, but again, they got relegated. I think it was in 2017, 2018. They did actually win the second division, the women's second tier, and they won it quite well, actually. And it looked like there was potentially a kind of a second coming for Doncaster Belles. But due to financial irregularities within the team, probably something they've suffered with their whole time, they were demoted to the Women's National League. I think it was the third tier of the Women's Football League. So instead of celebrating going into the women's top tier, they actually went into the third tier, even though they had won the second tier quite handsomely.
I hadn't realised that. That's another really sad note on it. I know I'm laughing, but there's really, really, really pretty tragic circumstances, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And so Doncaster play in the Women's National League now, Division 1 North. It's the fourth tier of the women's football team, and maybe we can debate it again, but I think there's an opportunity. I think with the heritage and history and just general brilliance about this football team and their importance in the women's game, I think there's an opportunity for somebody to invest and to give them a second coming.
Definitely, this is where Ryan Reynolds should be looking. The cultural significance of this team sort of goes further, I think, as well. They are also the inspiration for the TV series Playing the Field, TV series by Kay Mellor and Sally Wainwright, amongst others. Around 5 seasons, and that's based on the Pete Davis book. So I think culturally, this team has achieved so much more. I think we should probably get to ranking this side. And I think when we think about legacy, it does go so much beyond just the results, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. There's two strands to the legacy of this particular team. The way I see it is, as you've mentioned, you've got the cultural references. The documentary definitely helped with that. But to have a documentary made about you by the BBC is no mean feat. I think that's, especially this is in a day where we never had streaming services where you kind of had endless channels. This is going back to the day where we had a handful of terrestrial channels, and if you were lucky enough, you had satellite TV, B Sky B or BSB or whatever it was called at that particular moment. So, and then you got the very successful, I think, TV series with James Nesbitt, another frustrated Manchester United fan, and Ricky Tomlinson, who's been in a number of brilliant things, including another brilliant football documentary, Mike Bassett, England manager.
Indeed.
And also, Graham, and again, this is the frustrating thing with this bloody story. Doncaster Belles were the first women's team to record a cup final song.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I did see that. I would love to hear that. Yeah, that is a proper first. You're not just replicating the great football successes we've seen in the men's game, but also some of the missteps we've seen along the way. But no, there has to be a chance. Maybe their version was better than Coventry City's Shooting to Win.
Sky Blues Shooting to Win. But yeah, sadly, there is a second strand of legacy attached to this team, and it's the form on the pitch. And with the exception of a couple of peaks, it's really a downward journey with lots of misfortune along the way. And maybe that could be down to various reasons: mishandling, dislike from the associations because they're not as glamorous as your Arsenals, your Chelseas, your Manchester City, Manchester United, and Liverpools that play in the Women's Super League week in, week out. But yeah, now they play in the fourth tier. And so football-wise, this particular team from the early 90s winning 2 doubles in the space of 3 seasons and competing with the brilliant Arsenal team of that particular era doesn't have an on the pitch legacy.
No, absolutely.
But
So
they do. It's worth saying though that there are a number of well-known household names that have played for Doncaster Belles. Mary Earps, Sue Smith, Millie Bright, Bethany England have all played at one point in their time for Doncaster Belles. So it proves that Doncaster Belles is still able to fledgling some of these players into bigger and better things. I think Beth England and Millie Bright both started at Doncaster Belles.
Yeah, as you say, I think the opportunity there does remain, which would be absolutely fantastic. So where are you going to rank them, Jamie? 5 categories of greatness, from all-time greats, true greats, touch of greatness, edge of greatness, blink of greats, or not necessarily great, but without them, we wouldn't be where we are today. What do you reckon? What do you reckon?
So in their 3 seasons where they won their 2 doubles and they missed out in the middle against Arsenal, they played a total of 50 games. They won 46. That's in the league. That's a 92% win ratio. Their loss ratio was 6%. There's nothing like it in any team that we've covered on this podcast that has a record that can boast a 92% win ratio over a sustained period of time, such as 3 football seasons. In that period, they've scored an average of 5.5 goals per game, and they've conceded 0.6 goals per game. They're winning games 5-0, basically, every week. And this is the era when Arsenal are in that particular league as well. So they've got to beat a very good team as well as beat the good teams in that particular division. So they've won 2 doubles, which is quite an achievement for any football team. So they've got some titles. And I think it's in an era where they're not being paid to play. They're not really getting any support from any of the associations. They have to do everything off their own back. They have to organise themselves, I think, off their own back because the support and the funding is desperately lacking in the women's game at that particular moment. So they're successful off the pitch in terms of how they organise themselves. And we know that they had an incredible bond and team spirit. So in terms of how they're sustaining themselves, it's pretty commendable. It's highly commendable. And then we've got the legacy of a TV documentary, a book, as you referenced, by Peter Davis, I think, or Pete Davis. Somebody wrote a book about this particular team. And when you and I were talking about what's the next women's team we should cover, we both knew about Doncaster Belles. We both had the idea of their heritage. It wasn't a surprise. It wasn't like, oh, who, what, hey? We knew Doncaster Belles, and we know that because obviously they go right back to the origins of the women's game. So, long story short, I am going to start. I'm going to put them in tier 2. I'm going to put them as true greats.
So, I think it's. I think it's difficult to argue with that, to be honest. I think you can definitely make the case that how strong was the league they're operating in. That, I'm not sure all those sides were the strongest. So, how, on the one hand, you think, oh, well, are they just kind of flat track bullies? But on the other case, this isn't achieved through, I mentioned them earlier, but when you look at Total Network Solutions, Total Network Solutions, or the new stations they are, they have a similar sort of dominance, but theirs is financial. They have a financial advantage. There's an investment that they make. I don't doubt that once Doncaster Belles are playing well, are established as leaders, they're able, to attract players from the locality to play. But I think, their strength of achievement isn't bolstered by them paying to do that. So I think, for that reason, it still is unbelievably impressive. I think, actually, in terms of the numbers, it's like nothing. It's like nothing we've seen. As you say, the win ratio of 92% is just unreal. And they're just remarkably consistent. And bearing in mind, they're doing this with day jobs, whatever else is going on in your life. And from what I can tell, across that 3 years, there's one game against Wimbledon where they kind of underachieve. That's really quite something. I think what probably stops it from going higher is, when Arsenal join, it's not that they start struggling, but they, it becomes a duopoly. They sort of struggle necessarily. They don't continue that domination, and I think that probably stops it from becoming category above. But I don't think you can go any lower than true greats, because their legacy is so huge. So they are pioneers once again.
Yeah. Also, I mean, we haven't dwelled on it, but they've been in 13 cup finals. They've won 6 of those cup finals. 3 of the players, Gillian Coulthard, Karen Walker, and Bampton, are all in the Hall of Fame. So yeah, I think they deserve their place in the second tier. And I'm waiting, like a lawyer who's given his case now. I'm just kind of waiting for your verdict.
Verdict is in. Doncaster Belles, true greats. Excellent.
That's wonderful.
Well, I enjoyed that story a lot, actually. A few frustrations in terms of not being able to necessarily back up as much. Absolutely glorious to be able to enjoy that documentary and get a flavour for what it was like. And it really does illustrate the gap between what the game was like then, 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, and what it is now.
Yeah, the documentary is fantastic, and it's worth anyone who's listening to this just to go onto YouTube and Doncaster Belles. You'll find it. It's a 50-minute documentary, definitely worth watching. But yeah, you're right, Graham. It's frustrating that, I mean, this has been great fun talking about the Doncaster Belles. I think it would have been more fun if we had more information and we were able to dig a bit deeper. That part of the fun of doing these things is the endless research that we do and the things that we find, and we're able to kind of bring flavor to in these particular podcasts that we record. But I think out of this, there's 2 opportunities. I think there's 2 opportunities. I think there's an opportunity for someone or some bodies to start archiving the history of the women's game on the internet and making as much information as available. But I also think, and for the third and final time, I think if you're looking to invest in a football team and you've got a bit of spare pocket cash, Doncaster Belles is the way to go. I think there's opportunities there.
Yeah, definitely. That documentary has a footnote to it. And again, because it did pitch them as quite enjoying a drink. And I think there was a suggestion that Gillian Coulthard might have lost the England captaincy following that documentary, which didn't necessarily, well, certainly showed them enjoying themselves. I think that all seemed quite reasonable and normal to me, but there you go. Excellent. Okay, well, we should leave it there this week. Thank you as ever, Jamie.
Thank you, Graham. Yeah, thank you so much. That was great fun.
So we will probably, for our next women's team, move further to the modern day as we continue our historical journey through the eras. We have coming up over the next few weeks. We have the excellent Millwall team with Sheringham and Cascarino up front. We're going to have a lot of fun with that one, I think. We've also we're going back to 1975 for the West Ham side that wins the FA Cup final. There are some absolute legends in that side. And we are going to be taking a look at a story I know you're super keen on getting to the grips with, which is the unbelievable Torino side of the 1940s. Comes to a very tragic end, that story, but unbelievably successful. Who we have next week, we still don't know, but we will be back next week with someone. We'll see you then.